Welcome back to Basic Economics with Holly Jean. I'm your host, where we break down the biggest things happening in the US economy in a super easy to understand way. No PhD in economics required. Now, today we have a lot to talk about. We have the BLS that just released their jobs report, and that sent all sorts of chaos into the US economy. It affected stock markets, businesses, the media went crazy. It just unleashed economic chaos. So we're going to dive into the data and see exactly what it means and what you need to understand there. Secondly, we're going to jump into President Trump's reaction over the BLS report and the jobs numbers and why he decided to fire the head of the BLS. So a lot to cover today. Let's just dive right in. Okay, so in case you missed the latest news on the jobs report, or you don't read the employment situation being released by the BLS on a month-to-month basis, totally fine. I'm here to break it down for you. The first thing you need to know about this report and why it sent all sorts of chaos into the economy is because it showed that in the month of July, we only added 73,000 jobs. Now, this is way lower than the projections were anticipating, than people were expecting, and it's sending some red flags that, well, maybe the US economy isn't as strong as people are saying it is. The second biggest news from this jobs report was that the BLS went ahead and adjusted the jobs number from the 2 months prior. So that means in the month of May and also in June, they revised the jobs numbers down by a huge number. We're not just talking about small revisions. These were drastic revisions that everyone was talking about. For the month of May, the BLS originally reported 144,000 jobs being added to the economy, only to later find out that actually that number was only 19,000 jobs. That's 125,000 jobs that went missing. And then we have the month of June, where the BLS originally reported that 147,000 jobs were added to the economy, only to find out later, actually, after revising the data, only 14,000 jobs were added in the month of June. That's a downward revision of 133,000 jobs that just went missing. If you combine the month of May and June, that's over 250,000 jobs that no longer exist. Now, before we get into President Trump's reaction over the job market data and why he fired the head of the BLS, first, we need to break down why these numbers are so low. What is going on in the US job market? So first of all, in very, very simple terms, what all of this means, the fact that the July numbers were lower than expected and the fact that we're seeing all of these downward revisions in the job data in the months prior, is that the job market wasn't just weak in July. It's been weak for months. It shows we are not in very good shape right now. And it's confirming how hard it not only is to get a job right now, but the fact that no one's hiring and there's just so much economic uncertainty going on. Now, secondly, everything that came out in the July jobs report is revealing something way deeper that hardly anyone is talking about right now. It's revealing a deeper reality for us, which is this is not just a problem with the data, and it's not just a problem of policy. The reason why we are seeing all of this chaos in the jobs report is both. It's both in the way that the data is collected, and it's also being triggered by bad policy right now. Because let's be real here, the BLS isn't exactly the most reliable and accurate source of information. They constantly are revising their data, but the fact that the data is constantly being revised downward, it's not sometimes upward or downward, it's been consistently revised downward. That shows us that there is something something wrong in the methodology, in the way that the data is being collected. This is not a small margin of error. There's something deeply flawed in the way that we get this information. I mean, it's 2025. We need to figure out a better system for us that has more accurate information. So I think Americans are right to question the way that the data is being collected to begin with, but that's not the only thing that's happening here. We also need to dive into what is causing this slow job growth in the US economy. When you look at the policy side, you can't decide to deport a large portion of the workforce plus increase costs on US businesses through tariffs and expect for it not to affect the job market at all. Of course, it's going to show up in what we are experiencing in the US job market. When you start removing workers from the labor force, it shrinks the pool of available labor, and that makes it harder and more expensive for US businesses to expand, which makes it harder to sustain job growth month over month. So it makes sense why these numbers are so low. All of this pressure pushes labor costs higher and higher in sectors that rely on immigrant workers, and it ultimately will slow overall job growth. You can't shrink your workforce and expect strong job creation at the same time. But it's not just immigration policy alone. There's so many things happening. We also need to look at trade policy, because remember, tariffs are not job creators. They rob the US of jobs. They do nothing to create them. All they do is open the door to push US businesses to cut back on hours or cut back on hiring because you're increasing the cost of them doing business, and that cost has to come from somewhere. Tariffs play a huge effect into what is currently happening in the US job market, because when tariffs make it more expensive for US businesses to buy goods from abroad, they end up paying more for those materials and for those products that they need to operate here in the US, because higher cost don't just disappear. They have to come from somewhere. Businesses do not have access to unlimited resources, right? They can't simply say, oh, you've raised the cost for me to run my business. That's okay. It's not going to affect me. I'm just going to absorb it all myself. That's not how it works. It puts US businesses in a tough spot. It puts them in the position where they can either try to absorb part of it or try to delay rising costs from hitting their consumers, which is what we saw in the first quarter of the year. So many retailers and US businesses literally stockpiled goods in anticipation of tariffs, trying to delay the cost from reaching US consumers. They're doing everything that they can, but at the end of the day, it pushes them to scale back on hiring in their worker hours or cutting jobs. And that's what we are beginning to see here in the job market. And that's why everything that's happening in immigration policy, trade policy, and everything else that I don't have time to cover, because obviously there's a million things going on in the US economy, but it's just setting us up for failure. And that's how tariffs, which are essentially taxes on trade, end up becoming taxes on jobs. It is a direct cost to us in the US, not our trading partners. It is making it harder to hire here and keep US workers because you're increasing the cost of us doing business here in the US. Now, this leads us to the second part of how this jobs report is changing things for us in the US, because in case you missed it, President Trump fired the head of the BLS after this report came out because we saw so many downward revisions in the numbers, and the numbers in July themselves just weren't good. So his claim is that the numbers are rigged and he's going to hire someone better to be put into this position. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate because I would argue that if someone wanted to sabotage the president, they could have done it months ago. In fact, when you look at previous reports released from the BLS, a lot of the jobs reports actually made the president look really good. I would argue that we don't have clear evidence that the numbers are rigged. The problem is not the person who's in charge, it's the way that the BLS collects the data in the first place, because it's proven to be very unreliable. If you're constantly having to revise your numbers downward, not by small amounts, but by huge drastic amounts, there's something wrong with the methodology. There's something wrong with the way that this data is being collected, and we need to do better. It's 2025. We need to find another way. It's not the person that's in charge of the system itself. It's the way that the numbers are being collected that is the problem. Secondly, what I want to point out here as well is that firing the head of the BLS for delivering bad news about the jobs market sets this precedent for the next person coming in of only rewarding good news. If the penalty for delivering bad news is being fired, that means that the next appointee will have every incentive to deliver numbers that please the president rather than reflect reality. And this moves us further away from the goal of getting access to more accurate and transparent data. That's why I think data should be transparent, it should be decentralized, it needs to be competitive, not monopolized by a single government agency or a political party. We need to increase transparency here and not set up people in charge who are going to give us the numbers that we want. In conclusion, the July jobs report delivered a lot of bad news. It proves to us that the labor market is weak. It's also showing us evidence of stagflation, which is when we have inflation and unemployment happening at the same time. It means that the economy is stuck. We're not growing much. Jobs are weak, yet prices keep climbing. And the real problem here is the flawed system of government-produced data and bad policies that are affecting everyday Americans, and we are feeling it, especially in the job market today. So I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it is important for us to understand what is in the data and why it matters for us. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you guys believe that we're currently in a recession? Do you guys believe that we are currently experiencing stagflation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Some of you guys have been asking when I'm going to do more content, when am I going to do more YouTube videos for LOLA? So just so you guys know, we have a lot going on at LOLA. There's a lot going on in the background right now. That's a huge reason of why I have been a little MIA here on YouTube, but be sure to follow us on our Instagram at Ladies of Liberty. That's where I do the most content. That's where you're gonna get at least one video from me every single week. And so that you can keep up with the latest news happening in the US economy, we would love to have you there. But I am going to do my best to try to upload at least one YouTube video every single month for you guys. So please put in the comments below what video you would like to see us cover next. Thank you guys so much for all of your love, your support. Thanks for being here with us, and I will see you here next time.